Greetings students and welcome to one of the most important strategy lessons you can have. We're going to be speaking about space and the difference between space and space advantage. This is perhaps least understood imbalance of all and according to many authors, the hardest to understand. I will do my best that from now on you will know exactly what your advantage is when you have more pawns in the center, and I will give you general guidelines of how to be using that kind of advantage. So the first thing that we need to describe is space and how space is different from space advantage, because it's not always advantageous. So space is when your pawns are more advanced. That could happen on the center, the king side, the queen side. If we look right now at the position in front of us, you can see that the white's pawns d5 and e4 are more advanced than opponent's d6 and e7 pawns. So we would say that white has more space in the center or the king side. The problem with that is when opponent is getting, or you are getting squeezed and you don't have enough room for all of your pieces to be happy. So that's when space is called an advantage. If we look at the position in front of us, the c8 bishop for black doesn't have right now room on the board. That's why those pawns over here are giving white an advantage. Similarly, the d7 knight, highlighted in yellow, is not optimal as well. When you lack space, a lot of times you want to be trading the minor pieces. And to be honest, the only pieces that benefit from space are bishops and knights. And in the endgame, it could also be the king. There is an exception with the rooks. Rooks don't care about being in the center. They care about open lines. But player who has space, a lot of times can lift the rooks, for example, that way, whereas black cannot. That is useful when we want to, for example, launch an attack. But mainly, space advantage is an advantage that is about restriction of opponent's bishops and knights, and in the endgame, the king most of the time. So in this position, the problem that black is facing is the development of the bishop on c8 and that the knight on d7 is not optimal. And if they choose, for example, to trade with knight to e5, they're already paying the price of damaging their own pawn structure as well as closing the dark square bishop. So if we want to alleviate our space disadvantage as black, we need to find a way to trade pieces without paying such price. Another problem that black is facing here is that it's not easy for them to get space back with a typical pawn break, for example, like a6, b5. White is pressing that point just so many times with the pawn, knight, and bishop. That break a6, b5 is very hard to carry out to create counterplay for black. If they ever play like e6, or f5, that will result in further weakening of the black's position, and this is not panacea for black. Now, what is very interesting is that often space is misunderstood because people think that every time you have pawns more advanced, that is advantageous. Let's take a look at this position. It's almost the same thing, but it took away two pairs of minor pieces. Here, black is at least equal and probably slightly better. Well, white has space again, but this time it's not advantageous. Take a look. The bishop on g7 is a very active piece. It's on the long diagonal. What more can you want from a piece? The knight on d7 can go to f6, where it's active, as well as going to e5 without paying any kind of price, as this time we can take back with the bishop. Also, black is able to create counterplay, get the space back with the moves a6 and b5. So because there are no minor pieces that are restricted in the black's position, there's no space advantage for white, and white isn't better. For example, let's imagine that white wants to develop the dark square bishop. Now this pawn is under attack, so they develop the queen so that next the bishop could come into the game. After b5, we choose black. They're developing this initiative. If we take, the rook is active, the knight will have some outpost, they have space on the queen side, just pressure against the white's queen side pawns in general. And if we were not to take, and instead, for example, play b3, or rook b1, I don't want to drop the rook, apologies, then this position is again great for black. They have semi-open file where they can be applying pressure, knight is coming to b6, and black's pieces just look much better than white's currently. Black is at least equal, but when we say that, we mean usually that black is better. So it seems like the positions are very similar. Here, there is no space advantage for white, and here white is much better. Once again, due to the restriction of a couple of black's pieces and inability for black to carry out a counter-attacking plan. Now let's learn from Bobby Fischer. I want to show you a game where he used and utilized space advantage very well. And I think that this is somewhat a model game of how we can use space. A lot of the times we will get better pieces. Then with better pieces, we hope to develop an attack. And then opponent will have to pay some kind of price in order to defend against that attack. That could be they drop a pawn, maybe they will damage their pawn structure, depending on the level of opponent. With space, you can easily transition your pieces from queen side to king side, and so you're going to be striking where opponent is weaker. So in this position, black played h6, and it seems like black's structure doesn't allow right now to have all four minor pieces well placed. Well, the bishop on e7 is somewhat congested, and the bishop on c8, the light square bishop, doesn't have a good square either. Like it cannot go to e6 due to the fork, f5 is covered, g4 is covered by the white's pieces. A lot of the times in such positions, white would be looking for a kill, like, I am better, I have to strike now. This is what I work hard to overcome with my students. Instead, because you have a long-term advantage, your strategy is about preventing opponent from trading pieces. You can continue developing and slowly building up the attack. So white just plays rook to e1. Black plays bishop f8. Now we can trade on e8 and leave the black's queen susceptible to attack later by the rook. So we're not losing the file because it's the queen and she will be hit by the white's rook in the future, we hope. In this position, white continues developing. So even though we said white is much better, the moves that continue having that advantage are rook e1 and bishop f4. Now black plays bishop to d7, queen to d2. White continues to develop. This prepares the rook to come to e1. If black wants to get this rook into the game on a8, and they choose the path queen e7, we could play rook to e1, and now the queen has to go back, and they're unable to play the rook to e8 and develop it naturally. So instead, what black played in the game was queen to c8. What's the idea behind this move? Well, he wants to play bishop to f5. This way, they want to trade some pieces, and then perhaps white's space advantage that we're talking about is going to diminish. Now, white finds a very cool way of preventing that. They play d5 with the idea of later playing the knight to d4 in order to fight further for the square on f5. Now, in the game, knight b4 was played. It's true that black could play knight to e7 right now and still prepare this idea bishop to f5. Imagine in this case, white would just play something like rook e1, and after bishop f5, we would go back. From here, we still have space. It does seem that the knight on e7 and bishop on f8 are not good pieces. And from here on, we could slowly build some kind of attack. We continue improving the position on both wings and strike wherever we feel that our opponent is weaker, keeping all the minor pieces on the board. Instead, knight b4 was played. It seems like we may have to move the bishop, but knight e4 is played. Now, if they take our bishop, we can take on f6. That's simply not acceptable for black because of the damaged pawn structure and the weak king in the long run. So they take, we take with the bishop, now their knight is still under attack. So they played knight to a6, and now we play knight to d4, fighting for the square f5 and preventing that move bishop f5, keeping a lot of pieces on the board. c5 is questionable. We can take en passant, and then these two damaged pawns that we're going to put pressure against give white a big advantage over here. Instead, in the game, knight c5 was played. So they attack the bishop. For us, it's easy. We can drop the bishop back. a5 was played probably in order to keep the knight on c5. This prevents any future b4 moves by white. And the strategy is called solidifying the knight, making sure the knight feels safer over there. Rook to e1. And just take a look how white's pieces are coming for the kingside attack. It's hard for black to be bringing other pieces into defense. Maybe the queen can come and the bishop will defend, but white is bringing 5 there. The rook on the e file cannot be invading anywhere, but we could lift it because we have that space, and it's so easy for us to transition the pieces from one flank to the other, or from the center to the flank. b6, rook to g3. Now we're threatening bishop h6. Here, black plays king h8 in order to unpin himself, and just see what kind of attack white is building. So queen is coming to d4, queen e7, queen d4, and now black is going to be accepting the damage in the pawn structure in order to defend this attack. So white plays queen f6, pawn f6, and white still maintains space advantage. Just take a look at this Frankenstein on f8, double pawns on the f-file, pawns are scattered, white enjoys absolutely amazing pieces. So this is a technical win. Knight to d4, in the future we can use this f5 square for the knight, rook e8, rook e3, black is avoiding further exchanges, and just a few more moves in order to show you how the game finished. Knight f5 instead of winning the bishop pair, we put pressure on h6, and pushing the pawn really does not help because it's doomed anyways because of the ability of the knight to attack it on h4 as well. So instead we had bishop d7 attacking the knight. White won a pawn already, so not only the structure was damaged, but we're already capitalizing on material. Here, fantastic move, rook g3. They're unable to take on f4 due to the May threat there. Remember, our bishop is here covering those squares. So I had bishop h6, and after knight e4, white find a fantastic in-between move. First check, getting this pin, and then Bobby Fischer played f3. Black is losing the knight, and the resignation happened. So remember, space is when you have more advanced pawns. Space advantage is when you can identify some of opponent's pieces that are restricted. If you're at space disadvantage, you want to exchange the pieces without paying the price. And if you have space advantage, you want to continuously look for ways how your opponent can be exchanging pieces, and if possible, prevent that. Also, if possible, you want to prevent him from achieving pawn breaks that would get space back. Your advantage is that you will have better pieces, have better communication between the flanks, and you could use that to build up the attack. If you're enjoying my lessons, consider hiring me as your personal online chess coach. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.